The morning sun rose over the Pacific, casting a pale golden shimmer across the calm surface of the sea. Somewhere beyond that horizon, the greatest naval battle of the modern age was about to unfold. On the deck of the USS Essex, Commander David McCampbell adjusted the leather strap on his flight helmet and squinted at the sky. He wasn't a man of many words before a mission, but his eyes held the quiet intensity of someone who knew exactly what was coming. The men around him were younger, most barely out of their teens, but they looked to him with a mix of awe and reassurance. McCampbell wasn't just another squadron leader. He was the embodiment of discipline, courage, and lethal precision. His record spoke for itself, but the Pacific still had a final test prepared for him. Just a year before, few had heard his name. The F4F Wildcat he flew was already becoming obsolete compared to the newer Hellcats and Corsairs, but in his hands, it became an extension of pure willpower. While others preferred raw speed or firepower, McCampbell mastered the art of timing and maneuver, turning every dogfight into a deadly dance. What he lacked in aircraft performance, he made up for with uncanny awareness, anticipation, and unmatched marksmanship. He didn't chase glory, he earned it one mission at a time. In the weeks leading up to the Battle of the Philippine Sea, the Americans had begun their push through the Marianas. The Japanese Imperial Navy, knowing the stakes, deployed nearly all its remaining carrier strength to stop them. What followed would be known as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, a nickname born from the overwhelming superiority the U.S. Navy pilots displayed. But for men like McCampbell, it was never easy. Every kill was a matter of seconds, every mistake, a matter of death. On June 19, 1944, McCampbell and his squadron took off from the Essex under orange streaks of dawn. Radar had picked up a large incoming formation, more than 80 enemy aircraft. McCampbell, leading only 6 fighters, didn't flinch. They climbed fast and high, forming into tight combat formation, altitude their only advantage. In his Wildcat, he scanned the sky, lips pressed tight. When the first silhouettes of Japanese Zeros and Judy dive bombers appeared, he didn't wait. He picked the highest flying bomber and closed in with terrifying accuracy. His first burst ripped the plane apart. A second later, he was diving into the mass, zigzagging between enemy fuselages with instinctual precision. That morning alone, McCampbell shot down 7 enemy planes. He would have stayed longer if not for running out of ammunition. Even then, he loitered in the skies, covering his men with an empty gun, daring any enemy to approach. The tactic worked. His mere presence unsettled the enemy squadrons, and his wingmen finished what he started. When he returned to the Essex, fuel nearly gone, the deck crew erupted in cheers. But McCampbell's only reaction was to step down, brush off the dust, and walk silently to the ready room. To him, the mission wasn't a celebration. It was a duty. Over the next days, McCampbell flew sortie after sortie. Every time he left the deck, it was as if the ocean itself held its breath. Each time he returned, the crew took a moment longer to believe he was still alive. As the Japanese Air Force threw wave after wave of fighters and bombers, McCampbell remained unshaken. His tally grew. Not because he sought numbers, but because he never hesitated. He flew to protect, not to boast. His calm demeanor under fire became legendary. Enemy pilots tried to avoid him once they realized who he was. Some, in desperation, turned their aircraft to crash directly into American ships, but McCampbell often intercepted them first, ending the threat before it began. The F4F Wildcat, though slower and less advanced than many Japanese fighters, had one major advantage in McCampbell's hands: it could dive hard and roll fast, making it a perfect fit for his aggressive, intercept-style tactics. He pushed the aircraft to its limits, twisting it through clouds and flak, closing in until the enemy filled his gunsight. He rarely fired more than a short burst. He didn't need to. His shots counted. He flew with the knowledge that every second spent aiming was a second closer to being fired upon. So he made every second count. One of the most harrowing moments came when he led a defensive sweep over the fleet and came face to face with a squadron of Judy dive bombers escorted by experienced Zero pilots. The odds weren't in his favor. Yet he dove straight into the center of their formation, pulling tight G-force turns, his guns blazing. He took out 3 planes in the first 2 minutes, his Wildcat rocking from return fire. Tracers zipped past his canopy, but he barely blinked. He was in his element, locked in the chaos that only he seemed able to command. He downed a fourth, then a fifth, chasing the last into a dive so steep it threatened to tear the wings off his aircraft. When he landed that day, the fuselage was scarred and cracked, but his eyes burned with purpose. He never looked back. By the time the Battle of the Philippine Sea ended, McCampbell had claimed 26 confirmed kills, more than any other naval aviator in a single campaign. His actions helped break the spine of Japanese carrier aviation. While much of the credit went to radar, shipborne anti-aircraft guns, and improved U.S. coordination, those who witnessed McCampbell in the sky knew that what he accomplished couldn't be replaced by machines. He wasn't just a pilot. He was a force of nature. The Pacific had many heroes, but few matched his resolve. In the quiet moments between missions, McCampbell wrote in his logbook, noting every kill, every maneuver, every near miss. But there was never pride in his writing, only discipline. Every enemy pilot he brought down was another mission completed, another ship saved, another comrade spared. He flew not for himself but for the fleet. That was his code. And he lived it fully in the skies above the Marianas. The days after the first engagement passed in a blur of adrenaline, strategy briefings, and the roar of aircraft engines. The sea had become a giant chessboard, with each side pushing everything they had. Yet while the Japanese were burning fuel, men, and metal at an alarming rate, the Americans had something more, momentum. And David McCampbell was at the heart of it. Though physically exhausted, he showed no sign of slowing down. He lived in a constant state of readiness. Every time the carrier's alarm sounded, he was already halfway into his flight gear, heart pounding with silent purpose. When the next wave of enemy aircraft appeared on radar, larger than the first, nerves tightened across the fleet. This time, the Japanese meant to overwhelm the American screen and strike the heart of the carrier group. But McCampbell had already memorized the enemy's patterns. He knew their angles, their tactics, the way they stacked their fighters to protect the bombers. His advantage was not just skill, it was awareness. In the air, he thought faster than anyone around him. He was flying against some of the most battle-hardened Japanese pilots remaining, and he outmatched them at every turn. Climbing to intercept the formation, he spotted an alarming number of Zeros weaving above the dive bombers. The enemy was adapting. They had learned that McCampbell's presence usually meant destruction. This time, they came prepared to fight. But he didn't hesitate. He switched to full power, wings trembling as his Wildcat clawed for altitude. His squadron formed behind him, engines roaring, the sun at their backs. When they dove as one. The moment contact was made, the sky exploded. Tracers painted arcs of orange and red across the clouds. Flak bursts from the fleet below added to the chaos. McCampbell picked out the lead Zero and rolled into position, cutting his throttle just enough to stay behind the agile enemy. He squeezed the trigger, and the Wildcat's gun spat fire. The Zero disintegrated in midair. Without pause, he banked hard, diving underneath two bombers and coming up behind another Zero that was lining up on his wingman. He fired again. Another kill. The formation started to break apart. The Japanese pilots knew what was happening. They had seen this before. And panic set in. He didn't pursue every fleeing aircraft. That wasn't his style. He focused on the threat, those still diving toward the carriers. He shot down two Judas in rapid succession, barely blinking between bursts. As he broke away from the last, two Zeros dropped in behind him, pouring fire into the sky. His cockpit rattled. A bullet nicked the side of his canopy, but he held firm. Banking left, he pulled a tight spiral downward, forcing the enemy to overshoot. One took the bait and dove after him, straight into the line of fire of McCampbell's wingman. Gone in a flash of flame. The second hesitated, and McCampbell looped over the top, coming down like a hammer. Another short burst. Another kill. By the end of the sortie, he had added 5 more kills to his record. The sky was littered with smoke trails and burning wreckage. The sea below glistened with oil and debris. And yet the Essex remained untouched. The fleet, thanks to McCampbell and men like him, was intact. That night, on the deck of the Essex, sailors gathered to stare at the stars and wonder how they'd made it through. McCampbell sat quietly beside the flight deck, cleaning his flight goggles. He said little, even when men congratulated him. Inside, he wasn't counting kills. He was reviewing every move, every shot, every near miss. Tomorrow, there would be more. The Japanese, though bleeding from every engagement, refused to back down. On June 20th, with the battle stretching into its second day, McCampbell prepared for what would become his most iconic mission. Reports came in of a massive formation heading straight toward the American fleet. With most of the Essex's combat air patrol already in the air or refueling, McCampbell found himself with only one other pilot available. Despite the odds, he didn't hesitate. He took off immediately, just 2 planes heading into the path of nearly 40 enemy aircraft. It was almost suicide. But McCampbell didn't think in terms of numbers. He thought in opportunities. Climbing high above the enemy formation, he signaled to his wingman, then dropped in from the sun. The Japanese never saw him coming. He picked off 1, then 2, then 3 aircraft before they could react. His Wildcat danced through their formation like a phantom. Every shot he fired was fatal. By the time the enemy scattered in panic, he had downed 5 aircraft in just a few minutes. Then something extraordinary happened. He didn't stop. He pressed deeper into the enemy's rear, selecting targets with surgical precision. His wingman, barely able to keep up, later recalled the sight of McCampbell diving again and again, always alone, always emerging from smoke with another kill. When his guns finally ran dry, he had shot down 9 aircraft in a single mission, the highest single-day tally of any American naval aviator in history. Returning to the Essex with empty guns and a full heart, McCampbell landed to stunned silence. For once, even the deck crew didn't cheer. They simply stared. 9 kills in one flight. In a Wildcat. Against impossible odds. McCampbell stepped out of his cockpit, glanced at the sun beginning to set, and quietly walked back to the ready room. He didn't celebrate. He didn't boast. He simply wrote down the time, the aircraft types, the number of rounds fired, and closed the logbook. For the rest of the campaign, no one questioned his legend. Pilots spoke of him with reverence. Young aviators studied his combat footage, trying to understand how he moved, how he thought. But no one could replicate it. His skill was a combination of instinct, experience, and something deeper, an unshakable clarity in the chaos of war. While others saw confusion, he saw patterns. While others panicked, he focused. The Wildcat itself, by then already overshadowed by newer models, became part of the myth. In McCampbell's hands, it became more than just a fighter. It was a symbol of resilience. The aircraft bore bullet holes, engine wear, and the signs of hundreds of combat hours. But it never failed him. He trusted it, and it responded. There was no glamour in what he did. Only duty. And that duty made him the most successful naval aviator of the war. Even Admiral Mitcher, commanding the carrier task force, took personal interest in McCampbell's reports. High command studied his tactics. The press, hungry for heroes, demanded interviews. But McCampbell avoided the spotlight. He had a job to finish. The Pacific wasn't done. And until the enemy was truly defeated, he remained on alert, ready for the next call, the next climb, the next sky filled with fire and fury. As the flames of the Philippine Sea cooled and the Japanese fleet retreated in tatters, a new silence settled over the ocean. It wasn't the silence of peace, it was the silence that comes after a storm has spent its fury. David McCampbell had done more than anyone to shape the outcome of that storm. He had turned the tide of aerial combat with nothing more than a Wildcat, nerves of steel, and an unwavering commitment to duty. But even after the skies were cleared, he wasn't at ease. There were still patrols, still missions, and still young men flying into the unknown. He saw it as his responsibility to lead them, to train them, and to keep them alive. He became more than a fighter ace. He became a mentor. His quiet presence in the ready room calmed rookies more than any pep talk could. He would sit beside them, review film footage, point out subtle mistakes in formation or timing, and then nod without judgment. His words were never harsh, but they carried weight. When McCampbell gave you advice, you listened. He wasn't preaching theory. He had stared death in the face and flown through it, 26 times. That number, etched in the official reports, never defined him. But to those who served under him, it was a reminder that perfection wasn't just an idea. It could be real. It had a name. It had flown with them. He knew that luck played a role in any dogfight, but he also knew that luck favored the prepared. Every time he stepped into that cockpit, he did so with a mental map already forming in his head. He understood not just where the enemy would appear, but why, and how they would try to move. He played their tactics against them, baited them into mistakes, then punished them with clinical precision. And yet he never saw the enemy as less than human. He often reminded his men that every plane they shot down carried a pilot who believed just as strongly in his own cause. War, he said, was a matter of survival, but it didn't have to strip away decency. His respect for his foes was quiet but sincere. He had read intelligence briefings about Japanese ace pilots, studied their markings, and even kept notes on enemy flying styles. After some engagements, he would return to the Essex and describe the maneuvers he had seen with remarkable detail. He admired their dedication, even as he dismantled their squadrons. In another time, he might have wanted to know them. But in this time, the world demanded separation, friend or foe, life or death. As 1944 wore on and the war continued to push westward, McCampbell transitioned from the Wildcat to newer aircraft, including the F4F Wildcat. It was faster, more powerful, more capable in every respect. But even with new metal under his wings, he never forgot the Wildcat. It had carried him through the darkest battles, and he had learned to make it sing. To most pilots, the Wildcat was a rugged, underpowered workhorse. To McCampbell, it was a scalpel. He had carved a path through the heart of the enemy with it. He didn't need perfection. He needed trust, and he had earned it from every nut and bolt of that plane. In October of that same year, during the Battle of Leyte Gulf, McCampbell would again take to the skies and show the world what unmatched resolve looked like. On the morning of October 24th, he and his wingmen launched on an intercept mission and encountered over 60 enemy aircraft approaching the fleet. He didn't blink. He engaged them immediately. One by one, he hunted them down, sometimes two at a time, turning the sky into a canvas of fire. By the end of the engagement, he had claimed 9 more confirmed kills in a single flight, again. It was unprecedented. Twice, he had achieved what no other pilot had ever done. And this time, he did it in the Hellcat. By then, his name had spread across every naval air base in the Pacific. Pilots from other carriers wrote letters home about seeing McCampbell in the sky, about hearing his voice on the radio, calm and commanding even as enemy aircraft swarmed the airwaves. Some said his presence alone changed the morale of a mission. Others joked that the Japanese turned around as soon as they heard his call sign. But behind all the stories was a man who remained humble, disciplined, and focused. When his combat tour finally ended, the Navy wanted to bring him home. He had done enough. They awarded him the Medal of Honor, the Navy Cross, the Distinguished Flying Cross, and more. But he accepted them the same way he had accepted every mission, with quiet professionalism. He didn't smile for the cameras. He stood at attention. He didn't tell tales of valor. He nodded in respect to those who hadn't returned. He had survived, but many hadn't. And he carried that weight with him. Back in the United States, he was offered speaking tours, command positions, and a place in history books. But McCampbell didn't seek glory. He wanted to fly. After the war, he continued his career in naval aviation, eventually rising to the rank of captain. He helped design training programs, improve carrier operations, and prepare the next generation of pilots for the future. His voice, though calm, became part of every classroom, every simulator, every debriefing. He didn't want fame. He wanted others to be better than him. As the years passed and jets replaced propellers, McCampbell remained a symbol of what it meant to fly with purpose. Veterans remembered him not just for his combat record but for the way he treated people, with respect, clarity, and a sense of duty that transcended medals or headlines. He was often invited to commemorative events, where young pilots in crisp uniforms would shake his hand, unaware that they stood before the highest-scoring naval aviator in American history. But time, as always, moved forward. McCampbell eventually retired from the Navy, leaving behind not just a legacy of victories, but a standard. He died in 1996 at the age of 86, quietly and peacefully. His name was etched into the walls of aviation history, but more importantly, into the memories of every man who flew with him. And in the skies above the Pacific, where the sun still rises over deep blue water and the echoes of war have faded into waves, his spirit lingers. The Wildcat, that humble little fighter once deemed obsolete, became forever linked with his name. Not because it was the best aircraft, but because in the hands of David McCampbell, it did the impossible. It became a sword in a storm, a shield over the fleet, and a vessel for one man's incredible will. In every war, there are names that become legend, not because they sought it, but because they stood when others faltered, flew when the odds seemed impossible, and fought not for themselves, but for those beside them. David McCampbell was one of those names. And in the battle over the Philippine Sea, he didn't just fly, he soared.